Hello, my name is Michael Bell, and I'm going to read the book to you, Hewitt Anderson's Great Big Life. This book is written by Jerdine Nolen and illustrated by Hewitt Nelson. Hewitt Anderson lived with his parents in an enormous house at the edge of town. His parents believed big things were best. They boasted a grand and impressive residence overlooking the valley below. Their house was marvelous for giving parties. The Andersons gave beautiful banquets, elegant teas, and glorious garden parties that sometimes lasted for days. And Hewitt celebrated many happy birthdays there with his loving family. Hewitt Anderson lived happily and contentedly with his mother and father in the vast marvels of their home. A perfect house for giants. But alas, poor Hewitt was not a giant. He was very, very small. While his parents loved him dearly, his size was a source of great worry and concern for the J. Carver Worthington Andersons. How could a normal-sized boy be born to a family of giants? Never in the entire generations of the J. Carver Worthington Anderson or C. Mabel Luther Butters clan had anything like this ever occurred. Small, pint-sized, and miniature had never been part of their vocabularies or their lives. After all, they believed big things were best. In fact, all of the Andersons and Butters relations and friends of the relations were giants, ever since their great-great-grandmother Ida came to the valley after that terrible business with the beanstalk. The family had been known as people of great stature and girth. Hewitt had many friends too, giants galore. But nothing could change the fact that Mr. and Mrs. Anderson's own beloved son, Hewitt, was so very small, teeny-weeny, in fact. It was something Hewitt's parents had to live with and accept, for they loved their sweet little bundle of joy, but oh, how they worried about his size. And Hewitt was hopelessly in love with them too, of course. He loved the awe and wonder of them, the deep baritones of his father, and the resounding, resplendent melodies of his mother. When his father chose to sing great operatic versions of nursery rhymes, his mother would join in, creating wonderful duets and harmonies that made Hewitt's liver quiver and tickled his funny bone right down to his shoes. He laughed endlessly after being serenaded for hours. Again, Papa and Mama, please sing again, sing again. Hewitt squealed, and of course they never disappointed him. He was their extraordinary son, and they gave him more and more. Hewitt was so comforted by listening to the melodies, he found a perfect way to fall asleep, nestled in the deep well of his father's massive hands. Hewitt loved riding around inside his father's shirt pocket or sightseeing being perched from the brim of his mother's hat. It was impossible for the three of them to hold hands while they're out for their morning walks, as many families did in the neighborhood, so while his parents held hands, Hewitt sat in the folds of their entwined fingers, which made a nice hammock for him. He was gently lulled to sleep with the rhythm and motion of their walking. All the while, his parents secretly hoped that Hewitt was getting the rest and nutrition that he needed so that he would grow. But Hewitt was now 5, and he wasn't even much bigger than when he was born. Amazingly, it took a great deal of planning and preparation for Hewitt's parents to care for the mouse-like child. At times, it was like trying to find a needle in a haystack. When Hewitt's parents swept the floor, they always kept an eye out for him, and once or twice, he had to manage to get away from the broom just in time. Because Hewitt was so small, sometimes he would have to hunker down on the floorboards and wait till they finished sweeping. Now, Hewitt had inherited the very same bed that his dad slept in as a boy. It was a fine-sized bed for a growing giant, but it was entirely too big for Hewitt. He never had to worry about making up the bed because he was so small he never messed up the blankets or ruffled the sheets. The feather mattress and pillow were a lot of fun for him to plop around on, and the tassels on the bedpost were just right for climbing. He would sometimes get lost in the blankets. He'd pretend he was on a mining expedition, and he'd have to go down into the sheets and wiggle around for hours and hours. He had a wonderful time. His parents tried not to be too concerned about Hewitt's safety and well-being. But the summer Hewitt turned 7, he suffered a major close call. While his mom was making him a 7-layer birthday cake, Hewitt got lost into a vat of flour. As Hewitt was trapped, his parents began searching and searching for their child. Finally, Hewitt climbed out and told his parents, "Don't worry about me." But of course they did. Doctors were called in. Specialists from around the world made frequent trips to the Anderson home. But no one could explain their circumstances surrounding Hewitt's small and unimposing stature. Dr. Gargantuan, who was a brilliant scientist and family friend, tried to calm their growing worries. "Oh, he'll grow. He's just a late bloomer," Dr. Gargantuan said. Or maybe he is having the opposite of a growth spurt, and it'll come anytime. Finally, Dr. Gargantuan suggested, "I could make him my life's work. I could make him a celebrity and famous throughout the whole world." But his parents would not hear of that. They adored their puny little bundle of joy. Even though they believed big things were best, they took it upon themselves to make things right and see what they could do. So the next morning, Mr. and Mrs. Anderson woke up in the best of spirits. They said, "Today will be survival lesson number 1, swimming." But in Mrs. Anderson's hurry to cheer her family on, she tripped and fell. Her tumble caused Mr. Anderson to miss an important opportunity for a perfect 10 double somersault dive. The two of them created a big splash in the pond, a near tidal wave, in fact. And little Hewitt was so fond of the water that he was already in. He was washed clear to the other end of the estate, into the garden maze. Quickly, they rushed in to find him. But because Hewitt was so small, he had already found a shortcut underneath the maze boxwood wall. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, on the other hand, wandered aimlessly, trying to figure out how to get out of the maze. But Hewitt was able to coach them to the exit by looking underneath the walls. And in the end, Hewitt showed that his talents in the art of giant problem solving were, in fact, giant. For survival lesson number 2, Mr. Anderson showed Hewitt how to climb a beanstalk in the event he had to flee up the path of an oncoming rhinoceros that may have escaped from a nearby zoo. Mr. Anderson felt a surge of youth, and he climbed to the top of the Kentucky Wonder beanstalk with Hewitt tucked safely in his shirt pocket. But reaching the top, Mr. Anderson was paralyzed with a great fear. Well, Hewitt, he was used to being on these heights, and he knew exactly what to do. He wasn't afraid at all. He jumped into action. He grabbed a leaf and floated down over the edge of the beanstalk with a helpful breeze. When he landed on the ground, he aroused emergency fire and rescue squad, and they arrived in minutes with ladders to help Mr. Anderson down. This experience showed how wonderful and resourceful their son was, even though he was small. So finally, his parents decided these survival training lessons were not accomplishing their goals, and they decided to have Mr. or Dr. Gargantuan to come over as their dinner guest to talk again. Eager to discuss his plan for Hewitt, Dr. Gargantuan arrived for dinner, and they decided to discuss with him their scientific purposes for Hewitt. Well, the Andersons listened politely, but they would hear nothing of it. So, to lighten the mood, they invited Dr. Gargantuan to view their family's golden egg collection. They had inherited the golden eggs from their great-great-grandmother Ida, and these eggs were beautiful. They had a golden peacock egg, golden goose eggs, and of course, ostrich and emu eggs, all of solid, pure gold. Well, a family with such big and generous hearts decided to show how much they loved Dr. Gargantuan by giving him one of their beloved eggs. So in a moment of inspiration, they reached over and gave the egg to Dr. Gargantuan. He was so excited that he slipped and tripped and fell and knocked the door closed to their treasure room. Well, the key was in the lock of the treasure room and it fell out, and they were all trapped inside the treasure room. They were downhearted. How would they ever get out of the treasure room? Well, Hewitt was small, and he could help. He climbed through the keyhole, even though he knew the roast was in the oven still cooking. He went inside the lock and pushed the tumblers open so that the door could open, and all of the Andersons were able to get out of the treasure room even without a key. Oh boy, they were so happy. They danced for joy, even the doctor. And in that moment, in the world of the Anderson household changed. Hewitt, standing in all of his short splendor and glory, told his parents that he could be very helpful, even being small. And they decided to change their motto, and they realized that big or small, either one was best of all. And they couldn't be more proud of their son, Hewitt, or they couldn't love him anymore. The end.